It was March of 1953, and the rain seemed to have signed a long-term contract with the sky. The cobblestone streets of downtown Boston glistened like polished mirrors, reflecting the flicker of antique headlights and the hurried steps of black umbrellas. Among the many passers-by sheltering under awnings and shopfronts, there walked a young woman with a measured stride and eyes like open windows to a restless mind. Her name was Helena Price. Helena worked as a typist at the Suffolk County Courthouse. Her world was composed of the mechanical rhythm of typewriters, the scent of carbon paper, and the sideways glances of men in gray suits who had yet to accept the presence of women in roles outside the kitchen or parlor. She dressed modestly, favoring muted earth tones and neatly pinned curls beneath her felt cloche hat. Her hands were ink-stained from ribbon changes, and her heart carried the weight of something unnamed. That afternoon, Helena took a detour. Instead of boarding the number 6 streetcar home, she stepped into a narrow alley just off Tremont Street. Wedged between a milliner's boutique and an old tailor shop stood a place she cherished in secret. Yesterday's Pages, the name carved in fading gold lettering on a wooden plaque above the door. To her, it was more than a used bookstore. It was a cathedral of memory, a haven for thoughts that didn't yet have words. Inside, the store smelled of cedar shelves, old paper, and something gently floral, perhaps the dried lavender sprigs tucked between pages by romantic souls. The light inside was dim, softened by the thick leaded windows and a single overhead bulb. Mr. Wallace, the bespectacled proprietor, gave her a nod from behind the counter but said nothing. Helena liked it that way. She moved toward the back of the store, where a small section labeled Classic Courtship held novels from a more poetic era. Her fingers traced the spines absently, pausing when they reached a burgundy cloth-bound copy of The Marble Faun. Something about its worn corners and faded lettering called to her. She pulled it gently from the shelf. As she opened the front cover, something slipped from between the pages and floated to the floor. A single folded note, yellowed with age. Its edges curled as though it had waited too long to be seen. She bent down and picked it up. The handwriting was slanted and elegant, clearly penned by a man with intention and restraint. There was no address, no date, just these words. If you find this note, know that I have been searching for you long before I knew you existed. Meet me at Liberty Square, Thursdays 5 o'clock sharp. I will be wearing a white carnation on my lapel. I am waiting for you, though I do not yet know your name. C.M. Helena stood frozen, her breath caught between disbelief and fascination. She read the note again and again. It had the air of fiction, the aura of some half-remembered poem, yet something in her chest stirred, something like longing, or the echo of a dream left behind in childhood. She glanced toward Mr. Wallace. He was dusting a globe, oblivious. There was no way to know when the note had been placed, or if it were a joke, or a relic of some bygone courtship. And yet it felt written for her. Directed not at any woman, but to her soul in particular. She slipped the note back into the book and carried it to the counter. Mr. Wallace rang it up with a silent nod. Outside, the rain had softened into a whisper. Helena held the book to her chest and walked the long way home, her heart carrying a strange melody. That Thursday, as the town clock struck 5 and the bells echoed across the red brick buildings, Helena stood in Liberty Square. Her eyes scanned the crowd, men in fedoras, women in gloves, soldiers, sailors, students. Then she saw him. Across the square, seated on a bench beneath a leafless tree, was a man in a dark wool coat. On his lapel, a single white carnation. Helena's pulse quickened as she took cautious steps forward. The white carnation on his lapel glowed softly in the golden haze of the late afternoon, as though it were the only thing in color in a sepia-toned photograph. He was reading a newspaper, his legs crossed, one gloved hand steadying the pages as a light wind tugged at them. His profile was sharp, high cheekbones, a chiseled jaw, and a pair of wire-rimmed glasses that glinted each time he shifted slightly. She hesitated. What if it wasn't him? What if this was some peculiar coincidence, and she made a fool of herself by speaking? But then the words of the note burned again in her mind. I will be waiting for you. Her feet moved before she gave them permission. She stood a few feet from the bench. Excuse me, she said, her voice carrying a tremor she hoped he didn't catch. The man looked up. His eyes were a deep shade of blue-gray, and when they met hers, he blinked as though waking from a dream. Yes. She hesitated, then reached into her handbag and produced the folded note. She held it out to him, not speaking. He took it slowly, unfolded it, read it, and something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or confusion. He smiled gently. You found it. So, it was you who wrote it. He nodded, but not with the certainty she expected. I think I did. I must have. I don't always remember everything, but yes, I believe I did. Strange answer. Helena sat beside him, unsure whether to feel charmed or wary. I'm Charles. Charles Morrow. May I ask your name? Helena. Helena Price. They shook hands, formally, almost shyly. Helena studied him discreetly. He seemed refined, polished, yet there was something distant in his gaze, like he was constantly reaching into the fog of his own thoughts. I'm glad you came, he said. I wasn't certain anyone ever would. How long have you been leaving that note in the book? He smiled again, softer this time. I honestly don't know. Helena tilted her head. What do you mean? Charles looked at her, and his voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. I write things down because I forget them. Sometimes entire days. Sometimes names, places, emotions. Have a condition. It's not well understood. They call it episodic amnesia. Not from injury, just my mind. It comes and goes like mist. Helena sat with that for a moment, digesting. She didn't know what to say. But something about his vulnerability made her stay. The white carnation, the note, the poetry of it all, none of it mattered as much as the quiet bravery in the way he spoke. For the next hour they sat and talked. He asked her about her work, her favorite authors, her childhood on the outskirts of Cambridge. She asked about his life. He had once studied literature at Harvard, worked briefly as a journalist, and now spent most of his days reading, walking, and trying to remember the things worth holding on to. They agreed to meet again the following Thursday. And they did. Every Thursday, 5 o'clock, Liberty Square. Sometimes it rained. Sometimes it snowed. Once, the park was closed off for repairs, and they sat instead in a nearby cafe called the Violet Fox. But the time was always the same, and the conversation always flowed like it had never stopped. Helena began leaving him notes of her own, sometimes hidden in library books, other times tucked behind the bench where they met. Poems, observations, fragments of memory she hoped he might borrow when his own failed him. And every time they met, he wore a white carnation. Over time their connection deepened. There were no declarations, no dramatic kisses under the moonlight. But Helena found herself waiting for Thursday the way one waits for the warmth of spring after a long winter. One day, Charles brought a small notebook with him, leather-bound, worn at the corners. He placed it gently in her hands. "This is where I write the things I don't want to lose," he said. "Names, dreams, you." Helena turned the pages slowly. There, in his neat handwriting, were entries about their meetings. Her smile, her questions, her favorite flower, tulips, her fear of dogs, her voice, which he described as the sound of pages turning in a quiet room. She looked up at him and for the first time saw tears in his eyes. "Sometimes I think I'm just a story pretending to be a man," he whispered. "But you remind me that I'm real." Helena placed the notebook in her purse and took his hand. She didn't know what would come next. But for now they had their Thursdays. The rhythm of their Thursdays became as familiar as breath. Even in silence, Helena and Charles could feel the conversation lingering in the air between them, like jazz notes after a final chord. But the universe, as if jealous of their quiet happiness, began to pull at the threads of their sanctuary. It began with a telegram. One Wednesday morning, while Helena sat at her desk at the Suffolk County Courthouse, her supervisor, Mr. Ellison, approached with a beige envelope. "Miss Price," he said with his usual gruffness, "this came for you." No sender. Just her name in all caps. She opened it, her hands trembling for reasons she couldn't yet explain. Inside, typed in a blocky, emotionless font, were the words, "Helena, he is not who you think he is. Ask him about the widow in Charleston." There was no signature. Helena's fingers froze around the edges of the telegram. Her thoughts went immediately to Charles. His blue-gray eyes, the delicate way he held his teacup, the soft strength in his voice. And yet, a cold thread of doubt began to unspool inside her. Who sent this? And why? That Thursday, she arrived early to Liberty Square. The clock struck 5. Charles appeared on time, as always, white carnation on his lapel. But her smile did not come as easily. "You look worried," he said, studying her face. She hesitated, then pulled the telegram from her handbag. "This arrived yesterday. I don't know what to think." Charles took the paper, read it slowly. His expression didn't change. He folded it neatly and handed it back. "What does it mean?" she asked. His voice was calm. "How come?" "I don't know. I honestly don't. But Helena, you know my mind. There are gaps. Missing pages. Whole chapters gone. It's possible something happened, something I've forgotten. A widow in Charleston. That's specific." He nodded, eyes distant. "I lived in Charleston for a time. After the war, I had a breakdown. Checked into a facility there. Maybe I knew someone. Maybe I hurt someone. I don't know." Helena felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. "But how can I trust you? I don't know if you should. But I hope you will." She didn't walk away. Not that day. But she did not sit beside him either. The next week, Helena began her own investigation. She took a day off from work and visited the Boston Public Library, digging through archived newspapers and public records from Charleston. She combed through obituaries, hospital records, wedding announcements. The search was dizzying until she found it. A small article dated 1949. "Young widow dies in sleep. Mrs. Eleanor Greaves, 29, passed away at her Charleston residence. Widow of Lieutenant Matthew Greaves. She had recently been seen in the company of a local writer, Charles Morrow." Helena's heart stopped. Charles had been with her. And with someone else. Widow. Who died. She returned to Liberty Square that Thursday, a storm brewing in her heart. When Charles appeared, the carnation felt like a mockery. She didn't wait for pleasantries. "Who was Eleanor Greaves?" He blinked. Looked down. "So you found her?" "She died. In her sleep. After being seen with you." "Yes. And I blamed myself. For a long time. Her death was natural," the doctor said. "Heart defect. I believed I had brought sorrow into her life. I stopped writing. I stopped everything." "Were you in love with her?" "I think I wanted to be. She was kind. And I was broken. But it wasn't like this. It wasn't like you." Helena turned away, the wind catching her coat. "I need time." He didn't follow her. Weeks passed. She avoided Liberty Square. Her Thursdays became ordinary again. Gray, tasteless. She missed him in small ways. The sound of his laugh, his awkward compliments, the way he listened with his entire presence. One night, she opened the notebook he'd given her. She hadn't touched it since their last meeting. Inside, she found a new entry, dated the Thursday she had not shown up. Today the square felt hollow, like the shell of a sound. I waited because I didn't know what else to do. I keep rereading the pages I wrote about her. They are the most real things I have. I am terrified of forgetting her. And another, dated the following Thursday. I wore the carnation again. Silly, isn't it? Like a child with a lucky penny. But I believe she'll come back. And if she doesn't, then I'll keep writing. That's all I can do. Helena closed the notebook with trembling hands. The next morning she went to yesterday's pages. Mr. Wallace, as usual, barely looked up. She wandered to the poetry section and pulled down a volume of Whitman. Inside she tucked a letter. Her own words. Girls have known sorrow and doubt, but I have also known beauty in your company. Maybe we are all a little broken. Maybe love is trusting someone's pieces. Meet me next Thursday. Same time, same place. Thursday came. Liberty Square stood under a golden sunset. Helena arrived early. 5 o'clock struck. And there he was. No carnation. Just Charles. Real, waiting, uncertain. Helena walked to him. She didn't speak. She took his hand. He looked at her with eyes wet and shining. I remembered. Without notes. I remembered you. She smiled. Then let's begin again. Liberty Square had changed. Or maybe it hadn't. The fountain still gurgled its gentle melody. The stone benches still bore the initials of long-ago lovers. But something in Helena had shifted, and so everything she saw now felt different. Clearer. Weightier. That Thursday evening when she took Charles's hand and heard him say, "I remembered you," a dam quietly burst inside her, one she hadn't known she'd been holding. They sat again on their usual bench, just as they had before the telegram. But the silence was no longer awkward or filled with questions. It was reverent, like the hush before a symphony. Charles spoke first. "I want to tell you everything. As much as I know. And maybe more than I understand." Helena turned toward him, her fingers still in his. "Then I'll listen. All of it." He took a deep breath, the kind that reaches through the ribs and into old wounds. Eleanor Greaves was a grace. That's the only word I have. I met her in Charleston at a reading I gave. Back then my name still carried weight barely. She came up after, soft-spoken, kind. She said my words reminded her of her late husband, that they made her feel less alone. He paused, watching a couple walk by with a small boy chasing pigeons. I was not in love. Not fully. But I wanted to be. I needed to be. She was comfort in human form. We walked a lot. Talked about poetry, the war, loss. Then she died. Quietly. Unexpectedly. And it shattered me. Not because I loved her madly, but because I couldn't save her from grief. Or maybe because I had just started to believe I could matter to someone again. Helena nodded slowly. And after that, I checked myself into a hospital, St. Jerome's. I asked them to keep me away from everything. Pens, paper, mirrors. I didn't want to remember my own face. It was months before I left. I moved to Boston with nothing but a suitcase and a typewriter I wouldn't touch. And then I wandered into yesterday's pages. He looked at her now. And saw you reading aloud to yourself. Helena laughed, embarrassed. I do that when I'm trying to make sense of the rhythm. It was the most human sound I'd heard in years. They were quiet again. But this time the silence was a promise. In the weeks that followed, their routine deepened. Thursdays became sacred. But now they added Sundays. They visited the public garden, where Charles would push her slowly on the swing near the duck pond. They read aloud to each other, Whitman, Dickinson, Frost, and sometimes Charles would bring his own poems. One Sunday they sat by the river. Charles handed her a piece of paper. It's called Note Left in Autumn. She read silently. I forgot your voice once, just once. And the sky dimmed slightly. But then you said my name. And I remembered how stars must feel when they are found again by a sailor. Tears filled her eyes. Charles, this is beautiful. He smiled shyly. You are my memory now. Despite the poetry, doubt still crept in at the edges. Helena had not forgotten the telegram, nor the mystery of who had sent it. Then one gray Monday morning she got her answer. Mr. Ellison called her into his office. You've got a visitor, he said, frowning. Claims to be your cousin. Helena raised an eyebrow. I have no cousins. The door opened. A woman entered. Tall, dressed in navy wool, gloves, a wide hat. Her lipstick a severe crimson. She was striking. Cold. Helena Price, the woman said. We've never met. But I knew Charles. In Charleston. My name is Margaret Greaves. Eleanor was my sister. Helena stood up. You sent the telegram. Yes. I needed to know what kind of woman would be close to a man like him. Helena bristled. He did nothing to Eleanor. She died of a heart defect. Margaret's eyes narrowed. You're defending him already. You've fallen under the same illusion. He didn't kill her. But he didn't save her either. He filled her head with dreams of a new life. Then he retreated into himself, wrote her notes and forgot her name. You don't know what it is to watch someone you love disappear piece by piece in the eyes of someone who should have loved them back. Helena's voice was firm. No, you don't. But I know what it is to love someone who's trying to stitch themselves back together. I've seen Charles hold a pen like it was a fragile thing. I've seen him grieve and doubt and fight his own memory just to remember my favorite color. He isn't perfect. But he is real. Margaret paused, studying her. Then maybe you deserve each other. She turned and walked out without another word. That Thursday, Helena told Charles everything. He was quiet a long time. Then he whispered, "I always suspected someone blamed me. I just didn't know it was her sister." Helena touched his cheek. "She's still grieving. But I told her the truth. About who you are now." He took her hand. "I want to give you something." He pulled a worn leather box from his satchel and opened it. Inside was a silver ring with a small sapphire. "It's not an engagement ring. Not yet. I wanted to mark this. Whatever we are. Whatever we're becoming." Helena smiled. "Then let me give you something too." She reached into her coat and took out a tiny folded paper. Inside, a single word. "Always." Winter came. And with it, snow. They built rituals around the cold. Cocoa at Harriet's diner, long walks with thermoses of tea, quiet nights reading by firelight. Charles wrote again, stories this time. Always centered on lost things being found. One snowy evening, they visited Charles's apartment for the first time together. It was modest, lined with books and maps. On the wall was a photograph of a younger Charles, in uniform, beside an older man. "That's my father," he said. "He didn't survive the war. But I like to believe he would have liked you." She touched the frame. "Then he has my thanks. For raising someone who could survive this long." Charles kissed her forehead. As spring approached, Charles's memory improved. He no longer needed notes to remember their meeting place. He began to write letters again, not to send, just to practice holding thoughts for longer. One Thursday, Helena arrived to find him waiting with a picnic blanket spread, a radio softly playing jazz. He stood and bowed dramatically. "Miss Price, may I have this slow dance?" They danced under the blooming cherry blossoms. Slowly, reverently, Charles whispered, "I remember everything about you now. Not just your name, but your voice when you read poetry. The way you tap your teacup 3 times before drinking. How you tilt your head when you're curious. I remember how I felt when I saw you the first time, like a man stumbling into sunlight." Helena rested her head on his chest. "And I remember the moment I knew that love wasn't about perfection. It was about presence, about choosing someone even on the days when the memory failed." The morning of July 18, 1953, looked hand-painted. The clouds had stepped aside, letting a deep, unbroken blue stretch above Boston. Even the city's breath seemed hushed, as if it too was holding still for what was to come. St. Andrew's Chapel, nestled in the green heart of Boston Common, opened its heavy wooden doors as if blessing the arrival of a day long waited for. Inside, white lilies, soft lavender, and pale blue hydrangeas whispered their presence in fragrant stillness. Every pew seemed to remember something holy. Guests filed in gently, Most knew Helena well, the girl who became a woman in the shadows of bookstores and poetry. Few knew Charles beyond the quiet man with ink-stained cuffs and the voice that read sonnets as if they were confessions. But all were here for something more than a ceremony. They came to witness healing. Charles stood by the altar, nervous in every bone. Reverend Elijah Moore leaned slightly toward him. "You're pale, son. That's what happens when you love someone down to your marrow and know you're about to say it out loud." The Reverend chuckled. "Then you're more ready than most." Charles clutched a folded note in his coat pocket, not the one Anna had once left, but one he himself had written just hours ago, under a lamp's flicker and the weight of memory. Helena arrives. The chapel doors opened. Every whisper ceased. Helena appeared like a vision pulled from a dream stitched with lace and time. Her ivory satin gown kissed the floor. Her veil was a cloud catching morning light. But it was her eyes that held the world still. They held fire and forgiveness. Each step she took down the aisle undid a piece of Charles's fear. And each breath she drew said, "I know what you were. And I love what you are." He wanted to cry. Instead he smiled. The Reverend speaks. Reverend Moore abandoned tradition. He spoke of restoration, of truth confessed and love tested. Charles and Helena are not promising perfection, he said. They are promising presence. Through storms and silence, they chose each other. Today, in the presence of God, they come to seal that choice with courage. Charles squeezed Helena's hand. He squeezed back. Charles's vows. He turned to her and exhaled slowly. Helena Grace Price. I am the man who fled. The man who hid. The man who nearly let shame become my only legacy. But then you walked in, barefoot, laughing, turning the air into music. I don't promise perfection. Promise truth. To share every fear, every fault, every fragile part of me. To write our life together in ink that doesn't fade. To hold you even when I feel lost in myself. I promise that every day I will choose you over regret, over fear, over silence. Her tears fell, but her smile never left. Helena's vows. She lifted her chin. Charles William Hemsley. You were a question I carried in silence for years. Now you're the answer I whisper every morning. I know your past. I know its shadows. And I still walk toward you. I promise to remember who you are when you forget. To remind you that even broken men can build something beautiful. To be your home, your witness, your fiercest believer. I won't run. I won't hide. And when we're old, I'll still be reading your poems, even the ones you never had the courage to show. Before the Reverend could speak, Charles raised a hand. There's one more thing. He pulled the note from his pocket, unfolded it, and looked at Helena. I wrote this at St. Jerome's Hospital 6 years ago. I never mailed it. I didn't think anyone would want to hear from a man who vanished before his own wedding. But I want you to hear it now. To those I left, I ask forgiveness. To those who waited, I give this vow, that love, once lost, does not return unchanged. But when it returns with truth, it is worth more than what was ever perfect. He folded the paper slowly. I'm not who I was, Helena. And I will never stop becoming better for you. She took his hand. You already are. Reverend Moore spoke. Then by the power of truth, of love, and of God, I pronounce you husband and wife. The chapel erupted, not with wild applause, but with a sound that felt like wind in the trees. Gentle, reverent, real. And then, from the back of the chapel, music began. It was Harriet. She had taken the organist's bench and begun to play. Not a hymn, but an old jazz melody in slow time. What a wonderful world! No one expected it. But everyone knew it was right. Hours later, they sat beneath lanterns hung in trees behind the chapel. The scent of lavender and old cake lingered in the air. Helena leaned her head against Charles's shoulder. You remember what I said about the grandkids? That you'd tell them the truth. She smiled. Yes. I'll tell them that their grandfather wrote vows that made a chapel cry. And I'll tell them that real love isn't always poetic, but it is always worth reading aloud. He kissed her forehead, and the stars that had waited all day behind the blue finally came out, not for spectacle, but as quiet witnesses to a love that had not only endured, but transformed. That night he walked her home. Before she entered, she turned. You still have the notebook? Of course. Then I'd like you to read from it. Just one line. He smiled, opened the notebook, and found the most recent page. Today I remembered everything, and chose to forget nothing. Helena nodded. That's enough. For today. And she kissed him.